All right, well, here we begin with section 10.2, looking at light and its involvement in photosynthesis. So we know that light from the sun is involved in photosynthesis, but if we look and think a little bit more broadly, there's a tremendous amount of energy in the form of radiation from the sun that reaches Earth. Now, if we think of this in terms of a broad spectrum, of radiation, or electromagnetic radiation reaching Earth. There is everything from gamma radiation on one end of the spectrum. Now, this radiation has a relatively short wavelength. We have a lambda there, symbolizes wavelength. These short wavelengths have a relatively high amount of energy in them. On the other end of the spectrum are these long radio waves. They have significantly longer wavelengths and have a correspondingly low energy level. So all this energy from the sun can reach the Earth, but only a small segment of that energy is actually involved in photosynthesis, and this is what's called the visible light spectrum. So it appears as white light to us, but this visible light spectrum includes all the colors that are potentially perceived by the human eye. So if we look at it, we've got red, orange, yellow, green, blue. Let's see what my palette looks like here. Let's go with indigo and say violet. So there it is, Roy G. Biv, right? I'm sure you learned that in your physics class. And it's this part of the electromagnetic spectrum that is involved in photosynthesis. Now, it's at this point that I will admit that my primary motivation behind all of this is to just see the bright neon colors on the black background. But I guess at that point, it's neither here nor there. So if we look at this overall, we have this white light that we see and perceive, or from which we see and perceive color. That white light will then strike certain surfaces. Now, molecules that we're going to focus on are called pigments. Now, in the cell, pigments are proteins that will absorb certain wavelengths of light and reflect or transmit others. So if you have white light striking a surface, then what will happen is certain wavelengths of light will be absorbed and not seen, and others will be reflected. So if we imagine this is white light striking a pigment, and what we see is green, that means that the wavelengths of green light are either being reflected or transmitted or passed through the substance. So that is in part why chlorophyll appears green. Now, there are three primary molecules involved in photosynthesis in terms of pigmentation. So you have three pigments. The first is chlorophyll A. Chloro meaning green, phyll meaning leaf. So there's a green pigment in leaves labeled as chlorophyll A. There is a very similar molecule referred to as chlorophyll B, and there are a series of accessory pigments referred to as carotenoids. So named because of the carotene in them that gives them a yellowish or orange color. So these are pigments that absorb and reflect different wavelengths of light, and the colors of the visible light spectrum, the colors of the rainbow, are absorbed or reflected by these different pigments in photosynthesis. in order to capture the energy from the sun. So energy from the sun, all these different wavelengths of light, are absorbed and reflected by the different pigments, and then that energy is then used to drive the creation of chemical energy, which is what we'll get into in greater detail here shortly.